Thank you, Lee. I've got some front pages. It's David Prever here, by the way, and for Simon Lederman tonight and Monday night. Simon taking a long Easter weekend. Front pages for tomorrow. Daily Mail, doctors, halt NHS hotline now. We might talk about this later. Doctors demanding that a new health helpline due to be introduced across most of England within days should be suspended, warning that lives could be at risk. This is the new 111 service. They say it's not ready yet. But did you ever use NHS Direct? Which, frankly, I used it when my kids were younger, and they'd say, the doctor will call you. You have to give them all the details. They say, doctor will call you back in an hour or two. 3 hours later, you should be waiting for the phone to ring. It was rubbish. I've got Sharma Pereira with me, writer and broadcaster, is here tonight. Hello, Sharma. Nice to see you. And Jamie Kelsey is contributing editor for New Internationalist magazine. Hello there.
Hi, good evening.
Just before we do some of the other front pages, you just mouthed at me that it was rubbish, NHS Direct.
NHS Direct, absolute rubbish. But I have to say, I live in North West London. My daughter used the walk-in service at St Charles today. Fantastic. In and out in 10 minutes.
That's great. When it works, it's brilliant. When it doesn't, it's truly diabolical. We're going to see a lot of stories over the next 7 days, I think, about how the new NHS changes, administrative changes and so on are panning out. A couple of other front pages. Daily Mirror here. What's this? Chief Con. Furious top cop dodges misconduct charge but keeps his £1 million pension. This is something to do with the chap who was in charge during Hillsborough. Amazon faces traders' revolt over fee hikes, is The Guardian. And have I got one more? Yes, Daily Express here. Britain is colder than the Arctic. Why is that funny? It just is. We've got to laugh. Minus 10 degrees over Easter. Make sure you wrap up warm. One more, the Daily Telegraph here. Here's Her Majesty handing out Maundy money. Plus, MPs want immigrant ban to save British jobs. It's the front of the Telegraph. Just a few front pages. Nice to see you, Sharma. I've got that embarrassing thing that I know we've worked together before.
I know
where.
Absolutely. I'm not sure it was under this roof. I think it may have been under a different
You think so?
roof that had ads in.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know what we
A
call
commercial
them
network.
on the
I
BBC.
think we've been on the television together, but that's maybe my memory.
Oh, yes, we probably have, actually.
I think we have. Jamie, I've never met you before in my life, as far as I know.
Let's see how it goes.
That sounds full of promise, doesn't it?
It's good to see you both. Thank you for coming in. You've both picked some stories that you want to talk about tonight. Let's start with you, Jamie. You want to talk about news agendas, which is one of my favourite subjects. I'm glad you've picked up on this. Who decides what gets into the news? We should have pulled Lisa Aziz in for this, but it is interesting, isn't it? One of my things I always think is how, particularly during murder inquiries, a story will be in the news for weeks and weeks and just disappear overnight.
Absolutely. And also, when a story is being thrown at us and spread out over a long period of time, the Savile story in particular, there's lots more that's going to be coming out about it. And there's often times where you're wondering, why is a story being drawn out for so long when there's issues that actually seem to be way back in page 10 of the papers and been hidden away from us. But the reason I picked this today was the Rohingya story about the ethnic cleansing, really, in Myanmar or Burma.
See, I've read nothing about this.
That's why
and
we're
I read
bringing
most
it up
of the
today.
papers today, yes.
Yeah. Well, it's been... There was two sort of surges of ethnic cleansing in Burma last year, and there's been one about 3 weeks ago. And they are predicting that by the middle of April there's going to be this another surge of ethnic cleansing. So these are Muslims in Burma. And it's not been covered at all. The only way it's been covered is using the word clashes. The BBC's been covering it a bit. Channel 4 is the one who's been covering it in great depth, and they're the ones who are using the language ethnic cleansing, whereas most of the other mainstream media sources are calling it clashes. And, you know, our New Internationalists are really well known for covering these kinds of stories that aren't being covered by the mainstream, and they also focus on the majority world a great deal. And if you start using social media a lot more, particularly Twitter at the moment, it's very interesting how, I believe that this particular story was pushed into the mainstream by a Twitter storm by the Anonymous group 3 nights ago, where they used a hashtag, and they're very, very powerful, and, there's lots of pros and cons about Anonymous, but I think that they succeeded in pushing it into the mainstream media by making it the top trending hashtag about two or three nights ago. If you begin to scratch the surface a bit more, there's very predictably, there's very strong links to this ethnic cleansing, which seems to be very concerted, to plans for oil pipelines, and there's very high stakes for oil and gas sources in Burma, in these exact areas where this ethnic cleansing is happening. And it's quite shocking to see photographs, because these people who cover the things like this using Twitter, so Egypt in Cairo, in Tahrir Square, is really interesting because the story really was coming from the street. This whole concept of, normal citizen journalists, what you call citizen journalists, on the streets, taking pictures or bits of film and then tweeting them, and the rest of the world can see it straight away. And what was really horrific was, like I say, a couple of nights ago when we had this Twitter storm, there are people in Myanmar who are risking their lives to be tweeting out. And it was just picture after picture after picture of the bodies of people, people being beaten to death in the streets and burnt so they can't be identified that easily. And monks in saffron robes, orchestrating this, the military orchestrating this. There's now lots of stories, of course, of lots of the Buddhist monks are now beginning to try and protect the Muslims out there. But it's what interests me is who chooses whether that should be a story. Or, in West Papua, for the past 2 years, there's a cultural genocide happening to the West Papuans there at the hands of the Indonesian army. And again, there's very strong links to Rio Tinto and BP. It's all about resources and the battles for the last resources in the planet. And the indigenous people are often the people who lose out the most. And also, with this particular issue with the Rohingyas, it's really interesting that in this country, there's citizen journalist kind of organisations like the Occupy News Network, for example. They were able to, so these are people who aren't being paid, but they're just passionate about these kind of stories. They were able to get hold of a brilliant journalist who's on the ground in Myanmar and then get an interview with him over Skype, and then they were able to broadcast that. And it just interests me, who is it there who decides what the stories are?
It's news editors, isn't it? Foreign. We are quite spoiled in this country, spoiled the right word. We do have a lot of foreign news coverage, far more, for example, than the States.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, because what is news? And I was having this conversation with somebody who is in charge of multimedia, actually here at the BBC the other day, who said that when he first took his job on, he went with a mentor for 5 walks to actually discuss what is news. How do we define it? Because it's very easy to say, well, it's news, it's stories coming in from other parts of the world. But actually, how do we pick and choose? Because news is what shapes our world view. It's what shapes our understanding of where we are. Within a global perspective, and it colours the way that we approach absolutely everything, from global warming to the price of eggs, and it's I think it's a really interesting question. I'm not sure it's one that we can answer, though. That's the thing, Jamie. I mean, I think that,
well, it's driven largely by ratings a lot of the time, isn't it?
Yes,
absolutely.
But even ratings is dependent on what we know, isn't it? I mean, we know what we like because we're given things that we like all the time. But if you changed the flavour of news and people got used to the fact that you got more serious news or more world news, they'd just start to absorb it and start to see it as part of
even with world news. It's a difficult one, because working as I do a lot in local radio, not just here but around the country, if I was presented with some of the stories you've just been talking about, far-flung corners of the world, or issues of bin collections in the end of people's roads, bin collections, it's all news is local or whatever. That's what's interesting people when they wake up in the morning. It's probably they're more interested in their bins, generally speaking, whether they're being collected fortnightly or weekly.
Well, it's impossible to say whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's very tempting to say that's an absolute disaster.
I don't know. Maybe I'm being patronising. I don't know. But
no, I don't think you are. I think it was a lot easier 40 years ago when we could just get on with our own news, and we weren't constantly being bombarded with what's happening everywhere else. Because the trouble with news where you're getting it from everywhere, Jamie, including Twitter storms, is that you feel that you have to take responsibility for what's happening everywhere else.
Syria being a case in point more than anything.
Absolutely. Yeah. And after a while, there's this real confusion. There's a moral confusion, there's a legal confusion, there's a geographical confusion. You've got absolutely no idea anymore where your locus is. You don't know what you're actually supposed to be doing with all this blooming news. I much preferred it when I just read about the bin men. And on Sunday, I opened the Sunday Times and I caught up with all the overseas news and I put it into a small world perspective and just carried on with my life.
It's really, do you care? That's the thing. I mean, obviously what you're suggesting is, I don't care about what's happening in far-flung areas of the world.
No, I care very much, but I'm also acutely aware of the fact that I'm looking at it through my British perspective of feeling that this type of democracy is the right democracy, this type of looking after your citizens is the right type of looking after your citizens, and I'm not always sure that that's the correct way to be viewing world affairs.
You're immersed in this stuff because you work in it, Jamie, though. That's the difference.
It's actually...
And it's a hobby and an interest and all the rest of it for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm totally immersed in it. And it's incredibly unhealthy, actually, because...
in what way?
Because it's very hard to stay balanced and happy. Because if you actually expose yourself to what's happening in the whole of the world and try and kind of keep up with it, globally, constantly, which is what New Internationalist does... it's a pretty dismal picture out there. So one of the things that New Internationalist does is it balances it with the celebrating the fantastic things that are happening in the majority world as well. And that's really great. But I'm afraid to say the majority of it, as you're flicking through your tablet or your Twitters, is you could be following Syria for a day, and it's absolutely heartbreaking what's happening out there.
I thought it was very interesting to see that Samantha Cameron had been to Syria.
Yeah.
With her work. Is it for either NSPCC or Save the Children, I think she's an ambassador for. And I immediately looking at those pictures of her, hearing the horror stories of the genocide in Syria at the moment, you wonder what she tells her husband when she gets home. How was your trip? What did you see? And why? Does she sit down and say, what the hell are you doing about this?
I don't think he can do anything about it. I don't think governments have got that much power at all, have they, really? I mean, corporations have much more power than governments since the 50s, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinions. It doesn't really matter which kind of government is in. The corporations and their will is exactly what's going to happen to this planet. That's what's happening in Burma, I think.
Before we move on to other stories, I'm going to defend the BBC because I'm sitting here working for the BBC tonight, but listening to the World Service is always a great thing to do.
No one's going to argue with that.
And at least once a day to grab if you listen to a BBC World Service news bulletin, you won't hear anything about Nick Clegg or domestic agendas, nothing, and they will be leading on the sort of stories that you've been discussing tonight.
I support you completely on that. Aung San Suu Kyi, when she was over here recently, she made a point of coming, I think, actually to this building to meet David Lee Travis, because he was one of the sources of music that she'd been listening to. She could only tune into the World Service, and he was absolutely flabbergasted because she was a huge fan.
Yeah, it's an education. Everyone should listen to the BBC World Service, at least one bulletin a day.
Yeah, did you hear her on Desert Island Discs? She chose one of the records she'd never heard, which was The Green Green Grass of Home.
Oh, really?
Because her assistant said to her, you should choose that because you'll cry when you hear it. So she chose it, never having heard it before. Fabulous. Let's choose one of your stories, Sharmi. You want to talk, first of all, about what? What do you fancy choosing? I would start about young women being given book deals. It seems to me that the world is only interested in two types of young woman, and one is the wicked witch, sex-mad young woman, and the other is the virginal, sort of Madonna-type young woman. And so the two women are Amanda Knox and Malala Yousafzai, who is the young girl who was shot in the face for daring to suggest that women should be educated.
Shot in the head by the Taliban.
Shot in the head by the Taliban in
Yes.
Pakistan. Brought over to Birmingham for surgery. Fantastically, she has recovered. She's got a plate in her head now, a metal plate, but she's up and running. She's back at school, and she's been given a £2 million book deal to write about her ordeal, aged 15.
It'll be ghost-written, won't it, presumably?
I presume it will be ghost-written. I find it slightly distasteful. If she were writing a book about why all kids should have education, and that is why she's writing the book, I would be in favour of it. But in fact, she's being asked to write also about being shot in the face and what that was like and whatever. And I just think that it's too soon for her to reflect on that. She needs space between what has happened and starting this new life. And it must be very tempting for people to sort of, if I were offered £2 million to write about something that happened to me 6 months ago, I'd do it, David.
Yes.
Of course I would, because you want the money. But actually, I just wonder, when you're 15 years old, if what you really need is time.
You wonder who's advising her. Somebody must have advised her over this.
She'll get the money. She'll get this money in 2, 3, 4 years' time. But interestingly, I just wanted to juxtapose that with Amanda Knox, who has obviously not been charged or not found guilty to date of any kind of misdemeanour around Meredith Kerchier, but is going to be retried, we think, and has got her $4 million book deal, and nothing is being done to stop that happening or going ahead. And
Why shouldn't she write a book, though, I wonder?
Because at the moment, the case is still open. And it just seems to me that morally you need to wait until that case is over in order to allow that book to come out. But apparently they're not. And I just...
She doesn't have to go back and face trial, though, does she? She can stay exactly where she is. There's no extradition
because they
treaty.
won't bother to extradite her, will they? Or you know, I mean, I don't think they can. I don't think the Italians can bear to go through the whole thing again. I don't think the Americans can either, or they wouldn't anyway. But it's just... I'm not quite sure if I'm being clear about this really, but it's that complete obsession in the world with women who hit extremes, which I don't think is necessarily true with men who hit extremes. I think if somebody who had lost their limbs in a mine injury wrote a book, it would not be fated and get £2 million in the same way that this has. There's something about her virtue and her goodness and her sweetness and being a young girl, and conversely with Amanda Knox, you know, about her being the, you know, bitch.
There is a voyeuristic things, but these memoirs, there is a massive demand for them, isn't there? The so-called misery memoirs is the genre, isn't it?
Yes.
The idea that if you've been through some massive trauma in your life, then please write about it as soon as you can.
Well, I suppose
and they sell. We like reading about this stuff, or somebody does, clearly.
Well, if you think about it, a lot of self-help books are misery memoirs, aren't they?
Of course
I mean, you know,
they are,
they're sort of, oh gosh, I was there at the rock bottom, now I'm worth £7 million, you know, blah, blah, blah. I mean, misery memoirs are available in many forms.
Of course.
And some of them are positive, you know.
No, there's a huge demand. Years ago, my wife and I always end up talking about this, but went through 5 or 6 rounds of IVF. And we were writing about it for a paper at the time, and a publisher we met with said, do you fancy writing, if you write... We were writing I was writing one week in the paper, and my wife was writing the other, completely different views from the male and female thing. And this publisher said, do you fancy doing, if you write a book about this, male and female perspective, I can sell that for you as a misery memoir thing. And we came home from the meeting, my wife said, we should do this because it'll pay for another round of IVF, which was fair enough. But I remember coming home that night and having to write the column about infertility and then writing the synopsis. And I said, you know what, this is enough. Enough writing. It's bad enough that we're going through this. And it has a happy ending. We have 2 wonderful children. But I just...
Oh, brilliant.
I remember
thinking for the end.
Great,
Yes,
that's a great ending.
Well, there you go. I'll buy that book because it ended up as a happy ending.
I know. I just thought I don't want to immerse myself writing woe is me and 1,000 times woe. I couldn't be bothered doing it. Maybe we should have done. would have paid for the treatment. Does it bother you, Jamie, these sort of books? If there's a demand for them, there's a market and publishers. If people are buying books, any books at the moment, it ought to be a good thing, hasn't it? Do you have a view?
Yeah, well, I have a view on the young 15-year-old because it's not just that she's a girl, but also that she's a child and also she's suffering at the hands of the Taliban. And I think she'll be a huge inspiration to other young people. And I think that's really, really important. I think what you pointed out, though, is really important, though, who's behind it all, you know, and that's quite a frightening thought that instantly conjures up the idea of, you know, sort of agent sharks, you know, literary agent sharks and stuff. But I'd love to see that book out there, purely because it's going to inspire so many other young people, particularly her main angle, which is the lack of education for young girls in particular in the majority world. And I think that's really important that's highlighted as an issue.
All right, I'm here with Sharma Pereira, writer and broadcaster. Jamie Kelsey is contributing editor for a New Internationalist magazine. Let's go back to these are stories that you've chosen to talk about tonight. You want to talk about climate change. I just mentioned the front of the Express, where it's cold as the Arctic or colder than the Arctic. And you're a believer in climate change, are you? Because I don't know where my head is on this now. I sort of flip-flop. One week I think, oh my goodness, the world's going to end. And then I read various reports saying that climate change is hugely politicised, and I don't know if I believe it or not. Where are you on all of this?
Well, I'd put yourself back to being a smoker in the 50s when in America it was proved that for the first time that lung cancer is caused by smoking. And that was a real problem for the tobacco industry at the time. So they all got together, and this was in the early days of full-on advertising. The advertising kind of industry was beginning then. And they had a real problem, didn't they, obviously, because doctors were proving that smoking causes lung cancer. So they invented a sort of very scientific, highfalutin scientific title for some conglomerate of experts that they just paid to come in, and they started making very good statements, very beautifully worded, very smart stuff that sowed the seeds of doubt, that made people think, oh well, maybe it's not true, and you know, maybe there is another side to the story, and they worded it in a way where what they were saying was not illegal to say. And they sowed the seeds of doubt, and that's exactly what's happening today. There's no doubt that global warming is happening, and it's moved from. They're not using the word phrase global warming anymore. They're
Well, you
using
say
the
there's
phrase
no
climate
doubt, but there
change.
are doubts. If
Where
every
the doubts coming
scientist
from,
in the
though?
world said this is absolutely happening, then I would believe it. But I can find as many scientists who now say that it isn't happening.
Yeah, but in
and
the
that
50s...
that it is highly politicised, whether it's a naturalist like David Bellamy or people who have hugely experienced saying, no, this is, it's the international government panel on climate change are hugely politicised, and it's blah, blah,
Well, no,
blah.
I've heard those arguments, of course, but in the 50s you could have found scientists saying that smoking doesn't cause cancer. It was easy to find. But here's an interesting angle which I doubt people would have come across that much. But if you look at the studies of the military organisations, they did a research on 155 countries around the world, and of course they know that climate change is definitely happening. And so, actually, 155 countries, their military is already going through the preparations for the huge social upheaval that will be caused by climate change. So, if none of the other scientific proof has worked for anyone, then if you look at that, then that's incontrovertible as far as I'm concerned. Because even though there may be sowing seeds of doubt through the media for the general populace now, quietly, all the military are getting ready for the huge social upheaval. I mean, if we run out of oil, we've got peak oil was in 2005. So slowly that's declining. We're scraping the bottom of the barrel, literally with what's called tar sands. As that runs out, it's going to change. There's going to be such profound social upheaval. Also, the indication, the proof is that, we're going to have food wars and water wars. The failing of the corn in the States is
scaring the hell out of me.
Yeah, well, no.
I just don't know why I should care.
Do you have children?
I do have children, but you know what? At the end of the day, just putting food wars and energy wars and things aside for a minute, just let's go back to global warming, climate change. Why should I care that in X thousand years we will have wiped ourselves out as a race?
Because it's not X thousand. It's not X thousand years.
Okay, tomorrow.
Because
What's
your
so
children.
precious about us?
Oh, very good point. Exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, I just don't get it.
We could wipe ourselves out. The world would be absolutely fine. It will take a while to recover. But
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just think this is a Western preoccupation.
What about the argument?
With humanity being of any worth whatsoever.
We're thinking that humanity is so important to this planet that we should do absolutely everything we can in order to save ourselves.
Oh, I can't argue with that. If you want to see the species wipe itself out.
I have a Zen view of this, which is that if we're wiping ourselves out, we'll wipe ourselves out.
There is a climate change industry, isn't there, Jamie? There is an industry in climate change.
Yeah, well, there's an industry on both sides, yeah, of course, yeah. There's an industry and people saying that it's not happening, and there's an industry and a lot of money in both sides, yeah.
And the argument that climate has changed, and it always will, and that prior to the Industrial Revolution, the idea that we had this stable climate before all these gases were being thrown out into the atmosphere is wrong, isn't it? The atmosphere, and climate has always been changing.
Yes, absolutely, but not to the degree it's changing now, and not to the degree that it will be changed. By 2055, it will be an extraordinarily different world, climate-wise and environmental-wise, because obviously it's going to have a knock-on effect on our food and how we live and everything. But it's not a dismal apocalyptic vision. I mean, if people, a lot of people don't have that attitude. A lot of people think, the species is worth preserving, particularly people with children, and they like to see their children's children live a decent life and such. The answers to it are it's not like we're going to have to live in caves by candles wrapped around with animal skins, The solutions that a lot of people are putting forward actually recommend a life that seems quite appealing. Everything is sourced within 50 miles of where you live. The biggest boom industries will be recycling industries. We waste an enormous amount at the moment. I mean, the economic system that we're using just, chucks stuff out constantly. That famous phrase from Margaret Thatcher, built-in obsolescence. That's become sort of wired into the way our economy works, and that's these are things that can change quite easily.
All right, let's. We're going to just take a brief pause, get some news from Lisa. Taking your calls on any of this, by the way. If you want to come on and argue with Jamie or Sean, you're more than welcome to do so. It's 0207, or agree with them, 0207 224 2000. You can text us on 81333. Start your text with the word London. It's 11:30 now. We're the right-hand broadcaster, and Jamie Kelsey is a contributing editor with New Internationalist magazine. Got it right. Sean, another story from from you? What have you picked out tonight to talk about?
Well, I feel like we're going from the sublime to the ridiculous, actually, because Jamie keeps sort of coming up with these great kind of polemics linked to stories from today, and I keep coming up with bits of nonsense. But it's
Not at all.
Easter.
Stuff that's of interest.
It's Easter. Online dating for people with sexually transmitted infections.
I saw this earlier and I thought, what? It's one of those stories where you read it and you think, I don't know what to think about this at all. Well, I don't know what I think about it.
I thought niche markets are getting more and more niche, aren't they? I mean, you get uniform dating, sugar daddy dating, chubby chasing
religious dating, whatever.
And now you've got sexually transmitted infections dating, and this is in America. It hasn't yet taken off here, but it's basically, if you have got one of those STIs that can't be dispatched with penicillin. So, if you've got HPV, if you've got HIV, if you've got herpes, actually they're all H's, aren't they? Yes. That's the horrors, the H horrors. But yes, you can then go onto this website, and it means that you don't have to keep explaining yourself to people. You don't have to, deal with the fact that they're scared of magical contagion just by talking to you online, that somehow they're going to get something. But it's just one of those moments where you just think, gosh, I've never even thought about this as an issue.
Yes.
And then suddenly you see that clearly it is an issue, so much so somebody's set up a specialist website for it. And obviously you're not an online dater, David, because you are still with your wife. But for those of us who dispatched or lost our partners somewhere along the line in the great journey, one does get to spend quite a lot of time on dating websites. And it is quite interesting how they do all have a particular ethos or a feel that brings in types of people. So I'm quite curious about the STI site. I'm just interested in the fact that we have now got, it's like a commodity. It's like a service industry now, dating. That you can go and kind of cherry pick.
I think it's fantastic. I was discussing this with a couple of the chaps in the office earlier. There's one young lad who will remain nameless. He was moaning that he's single. Lovely, young, good-looking young boy. I said, why don't you do the online dating? And he was, I don't know. I said, there's no stigma anymore. Absolutely no stigma.
Absolutely, yeah.
Why would you go and hang out in a bar when you can try and meet somebody online? I did it before I was married.
Absolutely.
Loved it.
I've got
a ball.
daughters, and one of whom is old enough to be dating a lot. And, at one point, half her mates were all on. And let me tell you, they were stunning girls, stunning, accomplished young women, and all of them on dating websites because they just couldn't find aged 18, 19, 20 people within their own group to hang out with. It's completely the norm now. It's just
that's interesting. I didn't know that young teenagers were doing this.
Looking, so they're doing everything else as well simultaneously. It's just that you can put yourself on for free, and so therefore it just becomes one of their options.
It is fantastic, isn't it, Gemma, the way that our new interconnected world has ways of putting people together.
It's absolutely
and solving problems that you wouldn't have even, and then creating a market out of those problems that you would never even thought of. And clearly,
absolutely.
Now talking about it with you here, I mean, yes, if you've got some sort of sexually transmitted disease, rather than go through the rigmarole of having to explain that to a new partner, find somebody me too.
Yeah, absolutely. And immediately you've got past the biggest barrier. Of course, it doesn't mean you're going to find anyone. I mean, I can tell you've been to about 5 million websites, not found anybody worthwhile. But
have you been on many?
It doesn't actually
dates?
Help your chances of.
Are you just browsing, or have you?
I'm always browsing.
Really?
Yeah.
I think
I'm browsed off, actually.
Have you been out on any dates from the internet dating?
Gosh, yes, of course. Hundreds, thousands of them, yeah. And
I had some horror stories, I must admit.
I've got friends who are very happily married as a result of internet
dating.
Yeah,
I know a couple as
well. Yeah, I know a couple as well.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the only choice, especially these days where everybody's at a workstation or they're working remotely. You no longer have that office culture of hanging around together, having a laugh, having a drink, because even if you're in a large office space, you're all sending emails to each other. You're not actually speaking, and everyone can hear what you're saying. And you've got a big sort of screen in front of you, and then behind that you've got a divider, to stop people looking in. I mean, you're effectively working alone, even when you're in huge space. So it's
Very
very
true.
hard to socialise and create those relationships that grow into something more.
What's weird about this, though, is that it's an online dating agency for people with STIs, but you know that there will be people without who will... In the same way that there are women who are attracted to murderers and all that kind of thing.
Absolutely. and I remember reading that on uniform
It's dark,
dating,
but it's
they
true,
did a
isn't it?
check, and half of them, weren't actually uniformed people at all. They just came on pretending.
What's
to be
uniform dating? What's
uniform dating? Oh, don't you see the ads? They're on all the time.
I haven't seen them.
Policemen,
You get
firemen.
policeman,
kidding
fireman,
me.
nurse.
Traffic wardens, really?
warden, yeah.
Any uniform
Yeah,
as long as
absolutely.
Any uniform as long as it's a uniform.
Yeah, chef.
Lollipop lady. Really? Anything at all?
Yeah, bouncer. Oh, actually, that's not a uniform, but I mean anything that's
That's intriguing.
yeah,
How
train
funny.
guard.
Yeah, gorgeous train guys. Yeah.
Bus conductor.
I wasn't aware of uniform dating.
Yeah.
There's an angle on that STI one in particular. I had a real sort of revelatory evening about 15, 20 years ago now with a fella who was...
I'm wondering where this is going now.
It's totally safe. It's the BBC. He was a very, very famous gay porn star. I won't say his name, but he was apparently really famous. Every time he went off to the toilet, everyone else came over and saying, "Is that so-and-so?" And I was going, "Yeah, no, gay, can you introduce me?" But he opened my eyes about something very interesting, which was when when AIDS started, there was no medication at all, as everyone knows, and all of us probably lost friends at that time. And he was at that he'd survived. He was HIV positive, but he'd survived because AZT, I think, was the first drug.
Yes.
So he was taking this cocktail of about 15 pills at that time. And he told me the whole story, and it was fascinating. He said, "I've done okay because I make a lot of money. But everyone in that community who are HIV positive, we're all going to die." They took out millions of every credit card they could possibly get, and they were just racing around the world partying constantly, partying and dancing as if you're going to die tomorrow, because that's what they thought they were going to do. And he showed me these flyers. He'd kept quite a few of these flyers, and there was a special little flag in the corner of the flyers, which meant everyone at this party is HIV positive.
Wow.
So it's similar to that in a way, which is, okay, that's given. We all understand that straight away. But, of course, then AZT got invented, or I don't think I've got the right name of the drug, but the drug got invented, and of course he's okay. He survived because he was quite rich, but all his mates are now completely,
it's
totally.
billions on credit cards, right?
They've all lost loads on credit cards, exactly. Yeah, so
they were living like there was no tomorrow, but it turns out
there was. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It's just
right.
fascinating. Yeah.
Do you want to slip your headphones on, both of you? Got a caller here.
yes.
Oh, cool.
If you slip on your headphones and you can hear what... can you hear everything all right there? Beautiful. Here's Tony in Enfield. Hello, Tony.
Hello, David. Yes, we're talking about news and how it's reported. I've always had this opinion that all Western press is rather selective. It's almost like a fashion item. They report something that they think that, would have interest, and it may be interest on the surface, but really the real sort of news and the other contracting stories and opposition, it goes unreported. It's not, I think it's dreadful. I really do. BBC, ITV, Fox News, I think the Americans call it Fox Noise, don't they? But it's all very selective reporting, and we only get in one side of the story. We only start reading from or singing from one side of the hymn sheet, and I think it's sad, and I think it's dreadful, really.
So what would you want to see in your news bulletin when Lisa Aziz comes in at midnight? What would you want to hear?
Well, I think if anyone stands up for the poor and the weak and the oppressed, they're virtually ignored, aren't they? If there's a struggling country on the planet, there's no oil, no interest to the West, then we're not interested. If you can take Burma, you can take, parts of Africa. If there's no mineral wealth in those countries, we don't care about those dictators. I mean, the biggest merchant of arms sales in the world are American. They sell arms all around the world.
I'm not disagreeing with anything you say, but the truth is that most people, this is the point Sean was making earlier, I think, I'm right, that most people actually, we're all quite selfish. We care about, when you wake up in the morning, you want to know, is the world safe? Has anything changed? Am I going to carry on earning a living? Are my kids going to get an education? Is the hospital all right? Are the roads fine? These are just the basic things that you want to know to be able to get through your day, aren't they? Am I going to be safe and healthy today?
Well, that's a part of the grooming, isn't it? I believe that this is like...
That's human nature, isn't it? Aren't those the things you want to know in the morning?
Behavior.
I don't think it used to be.
I think if you're taught, and we have a civilized society where one day, just one day in the future, we don't hear about 30,000 children under the age of 5 years old that starve to death, or 200 million people sleep on the streets around the world. That's not sort of our nature to allow that to go. And it's like look, we're a so-called democracy and a Christian country. I do not believe this is a Christian country. It's a capitalist country, and we don't care, because that's the sort of grooming that we have. We're a democracy. We've got freedom of speech, so you can say anything you like in the United Kingdom, and guess what? Nothing changes.
All right, Tony, thank you. The drug, by the way, that you were talking about, Brian from Detroit's picked up the phone to just remind us it was AZT.
It was AZT. Thanks.
AZT, yeah.
That was the legendary Cuban Tony, I think we were listening to. Is he gone?
I think he has gone, yeah. I think that was Cuban.
It was good to hear you, Cuban Tony. But I think he's absolutely right what he's talking about, but then it's how you pitch it, because Cuban Tony, if you're waking up in the morning and you've got to go to work and you've got...
Why is he Cuban Tony?
That's his tag.
What is it?
That's it, sorry?
Is it the heels he wears?
Yeah, no, it's
the cigars he smokes.
Hopefully it's the both. It's the cigars, the heels, and the politics of the country. But if you're waking up in the morning, you've got half an hour before you've got to go off to work. If your front page is 30,000 children died today of starvation, and then you turn over and climate change, war, water wars, food wars, it's really, really difficult for people to actually feel enthusiastic about being alive. I think it needs to be balanced with the solutions and celebrating the people who are trying to do something about these issues. And there's, as you know, Cuban Tony, there are no end of people who are doing that.
I think it's interesting where people actually get their news from. And I don't know if I know that anymore, because I'm immersed in... I'm a news junkie. I work in the news business. We all do. And therefore, we consume it in a completely different way. I think... I might be wrong, but I think a large number of people go through the day probably without even knowing what's happened in the news, because they're largely not interested, actually.
And also, it's very difficult to... I mean, you were talking about... Jamie was talking about the Twitter storm earlier. And I'm a tweeter, and I actually don't follow that many people, but because I'm constantly changing them. But the storm you're getting entirely depends on who you're following and what's arriving in your timeline, and therefore it's not actually representative of feeling on the ground. It's representative of feeling in a particular piece of ground by a particular group of people. I mean, I started off with loads of politicos on my feed. I cut them all off because it was actually middle-aged, angry men, and all they wanted to do was call each other names and be really bullying and hectoring and horrible, which is why women never get involved with politics, because actually our lives are worth more, which is a shame. But what you see writ large is this kind of slimy malaise of, kind of male domination in our lives, coming through.
I wouldn't disagree with you. Today I was talking... before I came out, I said to my wife, there was a political story today that Damien McBride, former Gordon Brown advisor, his biography has been sold, or a book is written, it's been sold to publishing company, Buy It Back Publishing, and there's all suggestions that he will reveal the salacious details of what it was like during Gordon Brown's days. And I said to my wife, Damien McBride and blah, 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 and she's not in the slightest bit interested, because she has an interest in politics in terms of how it affects our kids' education and whether the hospital's going to stay open and whether the doctors... but not interested in that very macho, I said, you said...
Absolutely,
that
finger
stuff.
pointing. Boris is this, Ed is that.
Which is irrelevant to most people, to everybody, actually.
Well, it's not discussion, it's not discourse, is it? It's actually, it's
ego, male ego, isn't it? I mean, yes. I think when Twitter was started, it was a doorway, a portal, and it was fascinating. It had a completely different atmosphere to it, but now it's become a mirror. And it's why you cut off all those people who you were following originally. I think it's a really good idea. But, when you start to get into Twitter, you can change all the different types of people you follow. But once you start following a hashtag, then it's not the people who you're following, it's the issue that you're following. And that's what makes it really interesting. We were all way before the BBC with so many things recently. Well, you go back to Tahrir Square, everyone was getting it from the ground at that moment. Young people tweeting from Tahrir Square, and... That's no fault of the BBC, obviously, because it's impossible for them to contend with that, Yeah, the hashtag is a very important part of it. But I agree with you. I think this male ego, particularly, and they're just bickering, and then I've made my point, and now I'm going to go and have my tea. You know, and it's very dangerous because a lot of obviously I'm very involved in activism and civil disobedience, and I think it's the best thing that anyone, if you're patriotic, that's what you should be involved in. Howard Zinn was completely right. The real problem in the world is not mass civil disobedience, it's mass civil obedience. And for those people who want to get involved in that kind of world, you realise that, you can spend your whole life edifying yourself and following the news, but you've actually got to go out and be in the world if anything useful is going to happen. And a lot of people kind of feel, I've done my bit because I've written my blog or I've done my tweet, and that's really dangerous. It's the battle of what's called collectivism and activism.
0207 224 2000. Jamie, let's have one more from you. You want to talk about? It's called the bedroom tax, but we shouldn't really call it the bedroom tax. It's become the slang for these benefit changes, and the government's not happy with the way this is being referred to as the bedroom tax. You picked this out as one of your stories tonight.
April the 1st, I imagine all your listeners are aware of what's been happening in Spain for a long period of time and in Greece, and we're finally going to kind of catch up with them from April the 1st onwards in a couple of days' time. So there's a really large call out for people to fill the streets on Saturday right across the country. There's a very organised network of campaigns that are going to be happening that are people who are against the bedroom tax. One of the things that sticks out, I mean, your producer was telling me something extraordinary about a local council who was suggesting that people should get around this by fostering a child, which is really interesting. I think the council retracted that suggestion straight away. But you've got a guy, this is from the...
Yeah, this is Ealing Council. Ealing Council
that's right, yeah.
Suggested that people hit the government's bedroom tax by fostering... as you say, fostering children.
That's right. No, there's a former welfare minister, MP Frank Field. He's saying that you should take direct action against the bedroom tax by knocking down walls or bricking up windows in protest against housing benefit cuts, which is quite a radical solution.
It is for Frank Field because he's a very wise man and was involved in, I think I'm right in saying, has been involved in trying to reform the welfare state for a long time. Mm-hmm. So for him to say something like this, he's clearly very angry.
Well, you're spot on. I mean, he actually says... In this article, he's surprised at himself for ever having come out with saying something like this, but he said, this is how angry I feel about how unjust this tax is,
Is this going to be the poll tax for this government? Every government has a poll tax, don't they, it seems?
Yeah, that's what most people...
Issues.
I've got a feeling it won't be. The poll tax came out of... you're old enough as well, so I was there on the poll tax demonstrations, and it became much more than just about the poll tax. As everyone was going past 10 Downing Street, it was Maggie, 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 out, and it was an accumulation of all these things. I don't think we've been pushed far enough for everyone to want to come out on the streets, but it's going to start from this Saturday. And like I said before, the problem in the world is not mass civil disobedience, it's mass civil obedience. And in this country, I really hope that changes because governments have to listen to
you
people.
would like mass civil disobedience, would you?
It's what's made this country and most countries on the planet a much better place, without a doubt. It's certainly not politicians, is it?
Sharma, would you agree with that?
Well, if I could just go back to the bedroom tax for a minute. I mean, I was just thinking that one thing that could be done actually is the single people's discount on council tax could be changed so that, if you were under a certain age, under 50, under 60, whatever, you actually didn't get that single person's discount if you're living in a house. I'm just trying to think of different ways of doing it. My personal view, is that actually social housing needs to be better thought out, as does all housing. But actually, when we enter a tenancy agreement of any sort, we agree a rent for that amount of space, and we continue to pay that rent for that amount of space. And how we use that space once we've taken it over is really not anybody's business, as long as we are meeting the rent that's required for that flat or house or whatever.
But why shouldn't single people?
It shouldn't be an issue.
Why shouldn't single people receive a discount on council tax then?
Well, I'm just trying to think of a way, because it just seems to me that clearly the only logical and legitimate way of raising money is against property and is against people living, and how they're living in those properties. So I'm just trying to think of a different way of using property to raise money.
Would you agree, though,
rather
Jamie,
than
that
a bedroom tax?
Yes.
Because, why shouldn't people who live in houses on their own be taxed for the fact that they've got spare bedrooms? Not because they could give it to other people within social housing or to other people who need social housing, but because they could rent those rooms to people who need rooms.
Would you agree, Jamie, that the welfare state has become bloated and unsustainable and does need reform, or are you quite happy with the way it is?
I'm obviously not happy with the way it is at all, and I think that not enough people have been drawing attention to the fact that the blame is being put on the poor in this country, or the most vulnerable, the people who are least able to speak up for themselves, and they're being scapegoated for somehow being connected to what's wrong with this country. They are the people who have absolutely nothing to do with the reason we're in this economic crisis. In fact, the people who have caused this economic crisis are pretty much
But the welfare state is bloated, yes or no, and needs reform.
It absolutely needs reform, yeah.
And that's always going to leave somebody unhappy, isn't it?
Oh,
That's
no
the
doubt about
problem.
that at all, absolutely. But the way they're doing it at the moment is the whole series of austerity measures are very ill thought out. They're totally unfair. They're targeting the people who are suffering the most and need help. Ill thought out, for example, disabled people. So, DPAC are an organisation I work with at the moment, Disabled People Against Cuts. So hearing first-hand stories on a daily basis.
I've heard many of those. If you run a phone in, as I have a couple of times,
right,
on disability benefits and the assessments, I'm hearing some horror stories at the moment.
There's not a few of them. There's hundreds and thousands of them. It's really
interesting.
terrible. But the situation with the bedroom tax is disabled people very often, they need a spare room because the helper has to be able to stay there. Or if you're in a couple and the person who's disabled, it may be very difficult for them to sleep with. You can't sleep with your partner because of their disability.
What we've got to do
so they need that spare room.
But what we've got to do is establish that the councils use their discretionary funds to ensure that those cases automatically are passed and given the discretionary funds. What actually needs to be done is to ensure that the people who are administering those funds have a set of key markers that they meet every single time, which is, to me, I'd just be saying yes to all of those people. Of course you can keep them. I mean, it's not that there's a grey area where you're allowed to appeal. The problem is we don't trust the people to whom they're appealing.
Yeah, absolutely. But also that situation is there. But we are going to have our courts completely clogged over the next years by all these appeals. It's an absolutely ill-thought-out, disastrous idea, and we're not targeting the right people at all.
One more from you, Sharma. What have you got for us?
Well,
I caught you unawares.
GCSE changes, yes.
What are they doing to GCSEs?
Well, they're going to bring back more and more exams. They're going to cut down coursework, bring back exams. I'm the parent of two now young adults, 21 and 18. I think they're absolutely right to bring back exams. But the worry is that this will disadvantage girls because coursework was brought in the first place because it was felt that exams somehow favoured boys. I can't remember why. I can just remember when I was at
Wasn't it that it favoured girls?
reading,
I thought it was that it favoured girls.
No. It was that boys always used to do really well. And they used to say that the way that questions were written, the subject matter, the actual wording of questions was done in favour of boys.
Right.
They then sort of skewed it the other way and introduced coursework and all of this in favour of girls. And now they're saying they're going to go back to exams. So there's a sort of kind of confusion about what they're going to do. But I just think it's just much easier as a parent, having had to sit through children doing all this endless blooming work. They come back and it's like this culture where you start at 8 in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning and you're still going at 9 o'clock at night. It's an absolutely ridiculous system we've got at the moment. I'd much rather they were doing exams and they can pass or fail. It really doesn't matter, but at least they might get a life back.
Do you have a sympathy with teachers who have had to deal with successive governments relentlessly
No,
tinkering?
I have no sympathy at all with teachers. Most teachers have gone in straight from university. They haven't got a blooming clue what's needed out there in the workplace. They haven't got a clue what people are dealing with. I've got no sympathy with teachers at all.
You do know you're sitting next to a teacher, don't you?
I don't mind.
Yeah.
I think you're a great teacher. I teach as well. But, I mean, the fact is, I don't think when it comes to understanding what's needed in terms of key skills, basic skills, functional skills, all of those things, teachers have any idea how important those are for getting kids through in real life.
But do you, my question was specifically, do you have sympathy with teachers who've had to deal with as long as I can remember and have been interested in politics, governments who every education sector who comes in just tinkers.
Let me
Tinkers
tell
with
you,
the
I'm
curriculum,
on the
tinkers
board of
with
an FE college, and
Are you?
we had our corporation meeting on Wednesday night. Yet again, loads of changes, apprenticeships, this, that, the other. You know, and yet again, we're having to go, right, OK, do we have the funds to do this? Have we got this? Is this coming? The first year I was a member of that board, there were 15 policy changes. That was 5 years ago. There were 15 policy changes that year, all of which affected the offer. So we suddenly went from one thing to diplomas, to BTEC, to this. We had to do key stage 1, key stage 2, all of this stuff. And it changes continually and consistently so that the staff is always on the back foot.
Yes.
Changing the offer as well as the funding, everything changes. And so I feel sorry for them on that basis. But actually, in terms of what we're getting out there in terms of qualified children, I'm actually on the side of the children, and I think the teachers aren't doing a good enough job.
I think good teachers are definitely on the side of the children. I think what you're bringing up, I experienced. I was a teacher for 22 years, and successive governments telling us how they want to change it. They want to leave their mark, stamp their mark on education, and
yet still we churn out record numbers of illiterate children, it seems.
And it's extraordinary to be in this situation, because you really do. If you're a good teacher, you want to turn out young people who are prepared for the real world, but they're also well-rounded and they're happy and they're confident. And what you have is people who aren't experts on education, but they have an idea of what they think it should be, trying to, like I say, leave their stamp on it, and it's totally exhausting. And the teachers at the moment, I mean, I've left recently, but you know what they're going through at the moment with the U-turn government, particularly with Michael Gove, who I now think has gone so far he's lost the plot, hopefully, anyway. But you know, young people are suffering the same way the teachers are, because we haven't known for a while what's going to happen next. What's he up to now?
But the problem really, Jamie, is
yeah.
primary schools, isn't it? They should be sending those kids out literate.
Well, there's a whole other discussion, which I think it's our biggest national scandal that we send out illiterate children.
Yeah.
And I don't understand it either. I find it baffling. Thank you, Sharma. Thank you, James. It's delightful to meet. We can read you in International.
The New Internationalist, and the Twitter is Jamie Kelsey-Fry.
Lovely.
And my Twitter is Portfolio Woman.
Oh, I like that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, classy.
Thank you both for coming. It's been delightful. Could talk to you for another hour or so, which is always a good sign.